Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Daisy, your hostess, and we continue on in this video with the book titled Looking Out for Number One by Robert Ringer. Before we get started, I want to say thank you so much for joining me, and also to the subscribers of this channel. I appreciate you. I appreciate your comments and also your super thanks. That's very sweet and kind of you. Now, if you did find us at this video and would like to catch up with previous chapters, please do visit the book playlist and you will access many other books plus this one as well. This particular video is going to talk about the financial hurdle. While actually getting a jump on the financial hurdle is best earlier than later, if you are like me a little bit later in the game here, you know what? I think we can always learn something new that will help us live the best life ever. So I do hope that we're going to find some golden nuggets in this chapter. So I invite you to relax, sit back as I turn the page. Looking Out for Number One: How to Get from Where You Are Now to Where You Want to Be in Life by Robert Ringer. Dedicated to the hope that somewhere in our universe there exists a civilization whose inhabitants possess sole dominion over their own lives, where every individual has the ability to recognize and the courage to acknowledge reality, and where governments, as we know them, do not exist. Chapter 5: The Financial Hurdle. There are those who protest that making money shouldn't be so important, that there are other things in life that are far more rewarding than financial success, and I happen to agree with them. Nevertheless, numerous polls have found that poor people, regardless of their country of residence, tend to be unhappy. Such polls clearly show that the vast majority of people on this planet care a great deal about money, especially those who have very little of it. Though you may not be on the verge of starvation, the odds are pretty good that you're struggling to maintain your present living standard. Expenses have a way of increasing in direct proportion to rising income, the result being that most people never achieve financial peace of mind. Money, of course, is really just a means to an end. But paradoxically, if your mind is cluttered with thoughts of financial instability, it tends to blind you to the reality that the best things in life are free. In today's tension-filled materialistic world, it's unrealistic for the average person to hold out hopes for clear-minded happiness without achieving a reasonable degree of financial stability. Perhaps the most important commodity money can buy is freedom. I'm not so naive as to believe that money can buy total freedom, because so long as government exists, absolute freedom is beyond reach. Nonetheless, you are likely to have much more freedom with money than without it. Just having peace of mind is a great liberation in itself. Being free to think pleasant thoughts instead of stewing over financial problems is not a freedom to be taken lightly. Clearing the financial hurdle means having the freedom to act out of self-choice rather than basing your actions on chance or the choice of others. Only you can be the judge of how much financial success it would take to achieve the freedom you desire. For one person, it might mean making $75,000 a year, while for another person it could mean an annual income of $500,000. How much it takes to achieve the kind of freedom that allows you to feel in control of your life is up to you. It's your life. So don't allow anyone else to make that decision for you. When it comes to making money, it's important to guard against setting yourself up for disillusionment. If you've managed to achieve financial success, you already know that it doesn't buy happiness. People who dream about the day when money will no longer be a problem often expect something from financial success that it cannot deliver. I was guilty of that mistake the first time I made a lot of money. Instead of the nirvana I had envisioned, what I found was the real world all over again, just on a higher financial level. I became disillusioned and tried to compensate in other ways, but that only made things worse. At the time, I didn't realize that what I was really after was happiness, and that money was just a means to achieving that end. As I matured, I came to realize that the pot at the end of the financial rainbow was actually filled with freedom. I also recognized that time was the limiting factor in the financial equation. So it was not good enough just to work toward the day when I would have enough money to obtain the freedom I sought. As much happiness as possible had to be achieved while making the climb. The day I mentally transformed the climb itself from a struggle to a joy was a major turning point in my life. If you lose sight of the reality that money represents a means to an end, you risk getting caught up in the self-perpetuating success cycle. The more financial success you achieve, the more success you desire. Of and by itself, this is not necessarily a bad thing. The problem, however, is that people who get caught up in the self-perpetual success cycle usually fail to take the time to think about what it is they really want out of life. At its extreme, it can become a form of self-imprisonment. Buddha explained it insightfully when he said, "Excessive desire makes us slaves of whatever we crave." Everyone has seen this principle in operation. A craving of food, a craving for popularity, a craving for success, all make us lose our freedom to choose wisely. So while making money is important, you should strive to keep wealth and material possessions in proper perspective. The following appealing aspect of financial success is that it can rid you of many of your day-to-day burdens that can sap your limited supply of time and energy. In turn, ridding yourself of those burdens frees you to concentrate on the things that matter most to you. A melancholy stroll down Loser's Lane. If you've never experienced the misery of failure, the chances are pretty good that you haven't tried very hard to succeed. I've never met anyone who has made it to the top and managed to stay there, who didn't first taste the bitterness of defeat, usually many defeats. Failure, in fact, is a good indicator of both the effort you've expended and your willingness to pay the price of financial success. Disraeli cut to the chase with his simple observation: "There's no education like adversity." I've acquired a good deal of knowledge from my success, but not nearly as much as I have from my failures. In fact, I would go so far as to say that virtually every setback I've experienced has turned out to be a long-term blessing in disguise. Even more important than knowledge, I believe one gains far more wisdom from failure than from success. One danger of success is that it can lead one to ignorantly believing he is infallible. Following is a painful personal story that underscores this point. The result was a considerable amount of short-term suffering, but an abundance of long-term wisdom that led to great long-term success. After dabbling in the record and film industries for a short period of time, as well as a number of other entrepreneurial hallucinations intended to fatten the ego and slim the wallet, I awoke one morning to find myself facing the following quadrangle of financial facts. 1. An overhead of about $30,000 a month. 2. No income. 3. A bank balance of $11.37. And 4. Debts of about $500,000. I remember lying back on a chaise lounge next to my swimming pool and allowing my mind to drift nostalgically as I gazed out over the estate of my next-door neighbor, movie mogul Jack Warner. Since I had the only second-floor swimming pool in Beverly Hills, I had the advantage of being able to enjoy a view of Warner's massive grounds, private golf course, and all, while sitting around my pool. By finally setting aside the ought-tos of my situation and facing up to the ises, I arrived at the astonishing conclusion that I had a serious problem. Reality was starting to set in. As is always the case, reality had remained stubbornly incontrovertible and had simply ignored my desires, false perceptions, and outrageous lifestyle. As I departed the patio and walked through my bedroom, my mind drifted back to the pitch the realtor had given me the first time I had looked at my palatial residence. It was all very exciting then. The stories about Marilyn Monroe having once lived there and how Mickey Rooney used to dive out the master bedroom window into the second-story swimming pool at those wild, long-ago Hollywood parties. Exciting, yes, but insane. At the time, I concluded the deal. Nature must have been smiling over my shoulder and saying, "Boy, am I ever going to stick it to you. Nobody violates my laws and gets away with it." To express it in the simplest of cliches, once I moved into the house, the game was over. One by one, my 3 Mercedes and my Cadillac were repossessed. I was down to living in a mansion with no wheels to take me anywhere. Can you imagine living in Los Angeles without a car? I couldn't even afford groceries. I was getting panicky to the point of eyeing the cat food in the pantry. I started selling off what was left of my furniture, but the money was quickly swallowed up by alert creditors who were stalking me around the clock. The phones were disconnected and my gas and electric were ready to go any day. What to do? Where to go? Finally, time ran out. I didn't know that when sheriff's deputies come to hand you your walking papers, they arrive in pairs. When I opened the door, I was staring at 2 shiny law enforcement badges pinned to 2 gigantic chests. I gave the law enforcement ghouls a warm hello, then threw out a couple of one-liners in a feeble attempt to make pleasant small talk. No smiles, only cold stares. The dynamic duo handed me my walking papers, matter-of-factly spewed out some memorized legalese, then departed. The only thing they made perfectly clear was that they would be back in 5 days to check the premises, and if they were to find a tortoise inside, he could expect to be unceremoniously booted out on his shell. I believed them. I always believe people who wear guns on their belts. By selling some of my furniture for about 10 cents on the dollar, I managed to scrap together enough money to rent a truck. For the next 5 days, I was in a stupor, walking back and forth through the institutional length hallways of my magnificent home, going up and down the winding staircase, climbing into the back of the truck to loading my belongings and trying to organize my worldly possessions inside the 18-foot van. After a while, all I wanted to do was sleep, but I was down to just 48 hours, then 36, then finally, only 24 hours remained until my uniformed friends were scheduled to be back on my doorstep searching for reptiles. Every so often, I would wake up on the floor in the middle of a room, anxiously glance at my watch and realize, to my horror, that I had inadvertently fallen asleep for an hour or 2. I was running out of time. I never did get all of my possessions out of the house. When E-Day, eviction day, arrived, I was forced to leave thousands of dollars worth of clothes and other personal belongings behind. I can vividly recall my final trip down the stairs, loaded down with personal belongings. I departed through the back of the house to get one final look at the patio, the pool, and the view of the lavish grounds Jack Warner had so generously, albeit unknowingly, shared with me. As I looked out over the incredible beauty of it all for the last time, hangers of clothes draped over my back, two thoughts went through my mind. Thoughts that would prove to be my salvation in the long struggle ahead. First, I harbored no malice toward anyone. Not my creditors, not the government henchmen who were due to arrive at my door at any moment, not anyone else who had contributed to my pain. I did, however, harbor a great disdain for myself. What a fool I had been. I had violated every principle I had worked so hard to discover and nurture, principles that had consistently produced positive results for me when I religiously adhered to them. I had chosen to ignore this certainty that sooner or later nature would hand me a bill for my irresponsible actions. Now the time had arrived, and nature was presenting me with a tab so enormous that there appeared to be no way out. Second, I said to myself, I'll be back, bigger and better than ever. I'll pay the price, whatever it is, but I'll be back. With that, I descended the stairs for the last time, threw the final load of my belongings into the rear of the truck, climbed behind the wheel, and pulled away. As I chugged down the street, I couldn't help thinking of the contrast between the truck I was driving and the majestic homes, manicured lawns, and beautiful palm trees that surrounded me. And the contrast was magnified when the sheriff's car passed me no more than a half block from my house, going in the other direction. As certified government sadists, they undoubtedly were disappointed to find that the old homestead had been abandoned. Marilyn Monroe was dead, Mickey Rooney hadn't been in the pool for years, and the tortoise had moved to his new home, a Ryder truck. Leprosy in Beverly Hills. When you go broke in Omaha or Des Moines or Memphis, you make for good cocktail party stories. Of course, most of your old acquaintances would just as soon not be seen with you, and you get the usual blackball treatment everywhere you go. But at least there's no spitting. Not so in Beverly Hills. In the Golden Ghetto, they actually spit on you. Heaven forbid you should go broke in Beverly Hills, where bankruptcy is synonymous with leprosy. No one ever talks about you at cocktail parties. You're yesterday's news, you're dead. If you'd just stay off the streets, the beautiful people would be happy to leave you alone. Just don't become an eyesore, or all of those clueless Hollywood liberals who drone on endlessly about the plight of the homeless will have you arrested. Don't get me wrong, Beverly Hills has nothing against diseases. The residents just don't like lepers cluttering up the view of their swank shops and chic boutiques. The degradation and humiliation are impossible for me to adequately describe, so let it just suffice to say that Losers Lane in Beverly Hills is the loneliest, most humbling, most demeaning street on the face of the planet. Like so many things in life that are healthy for you in the long term, suffering is not something you would choose if you could avoid it. Nonetheless, it's stimulating because it forces you to be self-analytical and use your wits on the obstacles you face. I recall a prominent entertainer friend of mine consoling me by saying that he too had once fallen into the financial abyss and assuring me that the trip down is precisely what brings forth a person's great creativity. That, he said, is the source of the soul power that so many music greats possess. As it turned out, he was absolutely right, because I am convinced from a long-term point of view that it was the best thing that ever happened to me. When you're at the bottom, you have two choices. You either roll over and die, or just fight back. The one certainty is that you will never solve your problems by running from them, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. As creditors scoured the bushes looking for me, things began to heat up. What stands out most in my memory is the sadistic enthusiasm of so many of the creditors and collection agents who were on the hunt for the tortoise. For some of them, it became akin to a crusade. When you're the one being chased, your perception is that you are the focal point of every collection agent's life. Every now and then, a legal man, commonly referred to by laymen as attorney or lawyer, succeeded in serving me with papers, which usually led to a default judgment, but that was only a dead end for him. Whether a deposition was being taken or a default judgment being entered, legal man, much to his dismay, was forced to face the frustrating reality that the bare bones of a financial corpse could not be converted into dollars at his command. As a result, his sadistic zeal usually turned to bewilderment rather quickly. To give you an idea of legalman's frustration, I quote verbatim from the transcript of one such deposition. Legal man: "Where do you now live?" The tortoise: "Right now, I'm living on a truck." Legal man: "Could you be a little more specific about that?" The tortoise: "It's a Ryder truck. R-Y-D-E-R. Legal man: "Who owns the truck?" The tortoise: "The Ryder Company, I guess. I leased it from them." Legal man: "When did you do that?" The tortoise: "When the sheriff put me out of my house." End quote. It was possible to experience joy in the midst of financial devastation. It might have been at that moment watching legalman scratch his head, peep over the rims of his glasses, and display a totally perplexed look in front of his client. Notwithstanding the grim realities, it became clear that legalman honestly believed I had devised some sinister plan to secretly stash away untold piles of cash. Unfortunately for both him and me, such was not the case. The ghastly truth was that the cupboards really were bare, and when the aroma of money is absent, legalman quickly loses interest. His grab-the-chips-and-run approach to practicing law was a great aid to me in keeping the harassment down to the near-human levels during my delicate moments over the next couple of years. The road to freedom. The purpose of describing my lowest ebb was to give you a better perspective of your own financial situation. You may just be getting out of college. You may be someone pushing 40 and working 10 to 12 hours a day at a job you don't enjoy. You may be a woman who's had it with being a slave to her house and family, longing to get into the workforce. Or you may be an executive with a high income and all the material comforts of life, but no time to enjoy them. Whatever your present situation, if you're not free, if you're not able to spend the majority of your time on activities and pursuits that make life worth living, there is a way out. There's a way to get from where you are now to where you want to be. I did it from the most impossible set of circumstances imaginable. Many others have done it, and you can do it if you want it badly enough. Whether you're facing the standard variety of poverty or suburban poverty, high income offset by equally high overhead, the same formula applies. And the first step in the formula I'm referring to is to convince yourself that you can wipe the slate clean and start over again in another direction. Until you understand and believe this truth, you're not ready to take the kind of action needed to improve the quality of your life. Always keep in mind that there's a big difference between difficult and impossible. No one can force you to take the easy way out. Al Pacino eloquently made this point in his Oscar-winning role in The Scent of a Woman. Said Pacino's character, retired Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade, quote, "I always knew what the right path was. Without exception, I knew. But I never took it. You know why? It was too damn hard." End quote. A translation: you always have a choice, but most people are not willing to pay the price. If your weight and balance happiness scale is receiving sound data from you, it will present you with rational answers, i.e., answers that are in your long-term best interest. When your scale is functioning properly, it will remind you that you have only one life to live and that it makes no sense to waste that one precious life doing things you don't enjoy. And in the final analysis, it will tell you that you are the only one who possesses the power to hold you back. No one else can prevent you from going after what you want out of life. Finally, your scale should repeatedly spell out the price you'll need to pay for a better life so you can make an intelligent decision as to whether or not the price is worth it. Keeping in mind the reality of relativity, I find it psychologically healthy to look at financial success as a game. Games are fun to win, but no matter how many chips you accumulate, the reality is that all you'll be taking with you when the game ends is a quart of embalming fluid. Next, don't waste time sitting around and daydreaming about the way you wish things would be. Instead, acknowledge how they really are, then focus on ways to turn those realities into opportunities. Make an honest evaluation of your present circumstances and ask yourself if you're satisfied with your lot in life. If the answer is affirmative, then stay put, stop complaining, and enjoy yourself. But if you don't feel good about where you are financially, it's up to you to make a commitment to change things, whether it's your job, your profession, or your business. The one thing you do not want to do is spend the rest of your life drowning in regret. Continually remind yourself that change is hard but not impossible. Look out for number 1 requires conscious, rational decisions, and it's simply not rational to spend the rest of your life being disappointed and unhappy. The solution in the mirror. I again emphasize that one of my final thoughts as I departed my Beverly Hills mansion was that I was mad at no one but myself. This mindset was my saving grace. It was I who had sabotaged the tortoise. It was I who had made the decisions that led to my downfall. It was I, and I alone, who was responsible for my dilemma. Being bitter at others who contributed to your problems is not only a waste of time and energy, it's a bore to everyone around you. Never forget that the same guy whom you think shafted you in business deal probably was 100 reasons for believing he was justified in doing whatever he did. Everyone sees the world through his own biased perspective. Before I made it up the financial ladder the first time around, I conditioned myself to be grateful to those lecherous souls who pilfered my chips because they gave me the opportunity to learn through my mistakes. I worked hard at radiating my hostilities inward, where they belonged. I took the position that it was up to me to protect my chips, and if became lax, I deserved to suffer the consequences. Never waste valuable time and energy being mad at the person whom you believe caused your downfall. In the final analysis, it was you who made your decisions, and one of the unfortunate decisions you may have made was to become involved with the wrong person. It's healthy to think of the guy who separated you from your chips as merely a vehicle you used to punish yourself. Unfortunately, in the final analysis, universal laws prevail, and you will end up exactly where you deserve to be, and so too will the other person. So do yourself a favor and forget about the injustice someone may have done to you, and instead focus on the mistakes you made. I can assure you that I spent a lot of time on that Ryder truck browbeating myself to the point where I was appalled by my own ignorance and carelessness. As a result, my desire to succeed went beyond just making money. Rehabilitating my self-respect became a burning desire for me. The same principle applies to being bitter at friends for letting you down during tough times. Such a misdirected focus avoids the real issue. Sure, plenty of people forgot who I was when I went down in flames, but that's life. To forgive isn't divine, it's rational. I came to this conclusion through the following analysis. Being bitter towards someone else had no relevance whatsoever to solving my financial problems, and thus did not warrant an expenditure of my time or energy. Since my friends and acquaintances were human beings, they were subject to human weaknesses, and it's a natural instinct for humans, as well as rats, to abandon sinking ships. My friends had nothing whatsoever to do with my financial problems, so why should they be involved in my misery? Since friendships, like everything else in life, should be based on mutual value, I concluded that I must not have contributed much value to those relationships that did not survive my downfall. The only other explanation was that I was guilty of making bad friendship choices in the first place. But in either case, it was clear to me that it was I who had some adjustments to make. Finally, whenever anyone shut me out of his life, I figured it was his way of telling me that he didn't have confidence in my ability to make it back. And if that was the case, I lost confidence in his ability to make sound judgments because I was certain I was going to make it back. I therefore viewed it as the other person's loss because he had voluntarily removed himself from my life by displaying poor judgment in sizing up my character, my mental toughness, and my abilities. When things go bad, it's imperative that you keep your eye on the ball and continue moving towards solutions to your problems. If others make mistakes in judging you, that's their problem, and not an uncommon problem at that. People make mistakes every day. While turning your anger inward is healthy, being mad at the world is a waste of time. It will do absolutely nothing to your cause to sit around and be bitter. If you are now making this error, I urge you to revise your mindset as quickly as possible. Whether you are 16 or 60, every day spent being bitter about what others may have done to you is one more day subtracted from your limited, dwindling supply of time on this earth. Excuses. A surefire formula for failure is to concentrate on excuses rather than positive action. Nothing is as easy to dwell on as an excuse, and nothing complicates life more easily. An excuse may be justifiable, but the reality is that it will do nothing whatsoever to improve your life. An excuse focuses on the past. A solution focuses on the present and future. A favorite standby, of course, is the so-called bad break. Is there such a thing as a bad break? Yes, and everyone has more than his share. Old Man Murphy doesn't play favorites. He does a pretty good job of meting out obstacles on a fairly equal basis. The difference lies in the manner in which each of us handles misfortune. People who use bad breaks as excuses are often victims of the world owes me a living theory, which states anyone who believes that others, or worse, the world, owes them something are destined for failure and disappointment. Until a person cleanses this poisonous notion from his mind, he is unlikely to leave the starting gate, much less win the race. Labeling oneself is among the most popular ways to avoid personal responsibility in our modern-day culture of whiners and complainers. It is a convenient ploy, but one that is not supported by reality. So, never allow yourself to get lulled into the labeling trap. In this regard, the glass ceiling and double standard pay scale are two favorite of women's rights groups. But a woman focused on creating value doesn't have time to get bogged down in such issues. By attaching herself to women causes, she underrates her own unique abilities. Today, the number of women in major roles in both industry and government is undeniable. Did the glass ceiling stop Oprah? Or ABC's Diane Sawyer or Robin Roberts? Or Condoleezza Rice? Or any of the hundreds of women who hold upper echelon positions such as chairman, president, and CEO of major corporations? Some might be inclined to say, that's all right for a handful of women who have exceptional talent, but what about the rest of us? To that question, I would respond that your focus should not be on others. It's not a question of whether you have more or less ability than someone else. It's a matter of discovering what your unique abilities are, then exploiting those abilities to their fullest extent. The same principles apply on every level of the financial ladder. Take, for example, laws that force restaurant owners not to discriminate when it comes to hiring. This can result in white waiters working in a soul food restaurant or black waiters working in a Chinese restaurant. What's wrong with this? Plenty. From both a constitutional and natural law standpoint, no one has a right to force a business owner to hire anyone. The restaurant is his asset, and an individual has a natural right to do whatever he wishes with his own property, including discriminating to his heart's content. Some people argue that the government has an inherent duty to enforce its will in public places, and a restaurant is often used as an example of a public place. But the reality is that a restaurant is not a public place. It is a privately owned enterprise. If an owner chooses to not hire Latinos, men, women, blacks, or whites, and I don't approve of his hiring policies, I can take immediate steps to do something about it on my own by simply not frequenting his business. The above example is what free enterprise is all about. If absolute moralists would just leave it alone, it would work fine, automatically adjusting itself to meet consumer demands. When an owner sets a rule regarding his own retail establishment and that rule is too widely rejected, the workings of the free enterprise system will respond by forcing him out of business. He doesn't need an unconstitutional law to go broke. He can do that quite easily on his own. What I'm getting at here is that you should never lower yourself to fight for the right to be where you are not wanted. It's a mistake to look to government force or any other type of coercion to help you clear the financial hurdle. While it may get you what you want in the short term, force does not work over the long term. You will never fully exploit your skills if you work in an atmosphere of resentment. Irrespective of what left-wing intellectuals would like us to believe, there is an abundant supply of employers whose rational self-interest motivates them to hire the best available talent without regard to race or sex. In fact, no capitalist who practices rational self-interest would think of doing otherwise. The more competitors make the self-destructive mistake of prejudicial hiring practices, the better it is for those who do not. It's a matter of self-interest. Being black, female, elderly, or handicapped is just one fact about you, and in most cases not relevant with regard to your ability to perform your job. Even if you play the victim role to the hilt and manage to convince others that it's the primary deterrent to your success, it still will not pay your rent. It's a much better idea to focus on convincing a prospective employer that he should hire you for one reason and one reason only: because you can offer him more value than anyone else. Prerequisites. After all excuses have been set aside, the first question to ask yourself is what you really want to do with your life. And in that regard, there are two factors you should take into consideration. One is how you can most effectively use your unique talents to get what you want. The second is to choose a line of work that you genuinely enjoy. Fortunately, these two factors complement one another. If you do something you enjoy, the odds are that it's also the thing that will give you the best and quickest results, which is why you have to be the judge. Only you know what makes you happy. Two critical rules to follow when making this decision are: 1. Never pursue a career just because someone else wants you to. The person who advises you, whether it be your mother, your wife, or a well-meaning friend, will not have to endure the frustration and dissatisfaction that result from working at something you don't enjoy. Do not make the mistake of trying to be what someone else thinks you should be. 2. Never listen to anyone who tries to convince you that what you are contemplating is too unrealistic or too hard, or that it's too late for you to undertake. If it's what you've always wanted to do, do it. Keep in mind the old stock market axiom about the public always being wrong. Take a cue from Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and don't be afraid to spread your wings above the negative masses. Nature's omnipresent reality. Price paying. Price paying can be a dreary activity, so much so that after a while you might begin to wonder why it doesn't just go away and leave you alone. Unfortunately, it won't. Whether you like it or not, the price-paying toll machine will always stand between you and your goals. And the annoying thing about this machine is that it never malfunctions. You either pay the required toll or it doesn't let you pass. There are no exceptions. So, after carefully deciding what you really want to do with your life, the next step is to face up to the cost. Don't kid yourself and try to imagine that you're going to get off easy. The price that will be required of you will depend on a number of factors, such as the importance of your non-financial objectives, your emotional makeup, your skills, and who the most important people in your life are. Such factors as these, coupled with the extent of your financial aspirations, will determine the price you can expect to pay in terms of time, energy, money, and the jealousy and the resentment of others, not to mention having less time with friends and family and the sacrifice of countless other activities that may now be an important part of your life. This is where you need to do some really serious factual meditation, i.e., thinking about the facts of your situation in a relaxed environment. You should analyze the total price on your own without input from others. If your weight and balance happiness scale is functioning properly, which is dependent upon your feeding it correct information, it should be able to determine whether the price you will have to pay is worth what you hope to gain in return. Reassess your luggage. In Chapter 2, I discussed the importance of ridding yourself of excess baggage. If you allow too many unnecessary burdens to enter and remain in your life, you'll end up fighting the predators in the money game with one arm tied behind your back. For example, if you're trying to support someone in luxury when your financial situation isn't up to the task, you're playing in quicksand. or if you're married to or living with a person who isn't patient and understanding, who is not sympathetic to your goals, it's tantamount to having a traitor in your ranks. A non-supportive domestic partner can sap you of valuable time and energy. If you're in love with someone who fits either of these descriptions, you may be faced with one of the biggest price-paying decisions you'll ever have to make. Is your desire for financial success strong enough to part ways with your mate? If you're like most people, you probably have a great many burdens in your life, and it's crucial to your financial success that you rid yourself of as many of those burdens as possible. If you're serious about clearing the financial hurdle, you simply can't afford the extra baggage. The heaviest bag of all. The heaviest of all excess baggage is an inflated ego, particularly if it controls you rather than the other way around. Everyone has an ego, so don't delude yourself into believing you don't. It's far better to acknowledge the existence of your ego and consciously work to keep it under control. Most people can't afford the price of both, an overstuffed ego and financial success. In fact, the cost of such an ego is the foregoing of financial success. A mega ego is like a dinosaur lying on your front lawn. If you don't continually feed it, it might just decide, get up and step on your house. At its extreme, a bloated ego can result in egorupsy, a form of bankruptcy caused by the investment of too much time and capital in vanity. Avoid business dealings with anyone afflicted with egorupsy, because when he goes down for the final count, he's liable to take you with him. Feeding the ego is habit-forming and can lead the addict to commit dishonest acts in his desperation to feed his habit. Following are some telltale signs that an individual is probably afflicted with egorupsy. Trying to impress others with how well he's doing. The more someone spouts off his accomplishments, the less likely it is that he has accomplished much of anything. Constantly mouthing off about the deals he's working on. Dwelling on what he's accomplished in the past. Rapid expansion of offices, particularly if lavishly decorated, staff, or business in general. Talking incessantly about what he knows. Talking incessantly about who he knows. When most or all of the above signs are evident, the patient's case of egorupsy clearly is in its advanced stages, and he has probably deteriorated beyond hope. Best you shield your face when passing him in order to avoid getting infected. Zip the lip. Feeding a big ego often takes the form of perpetual movement of the mouth and tongue. Big mistake. Concentrate at all times on being both quiet and patient. The safest way to operate is behind the scenes with a low profile. In my business, though publicity comes with the territory, I make it a point to be tight-lipped about my projects until they are completed. There's seldom anything to gain by giving the world advance notice of your objectives. How many times have you jumped at the gun and talked about your plans prematurely, only to be embarrassed when they fell through? If you manage to achieve your desired end, people will know about it soon enough. Additionally, you may even gain a reputation for being humble as a result of not shooting off your mouth about what you're working on. The next time you're tempted to make an advance announcement to the world, remember that Murphy is out there waiting to trip you up. Even if you succeed in backing up your words, people will perceive you as a braggart. It's certainly not worth the risk of having a bunch of neurotic individuals jealously gnashing their teeth and doing everything possible to see to it that you end up dining on your own words some fine evening. If Satan isn't alive and well on planet Earth, his chief aide certainly is. He's a little guy with a sadistic smirk on his face who carries around a miniature pitchfork. The next time you shoot off your mouth about a plan you have in the works, quickly turn your head to the left. There you'll see him, sitting on your shoulder and whispering in your ear. He's none other than the Zip the Lip leprechaun. The devil has assigned his homely little chap the task of urging incurable chatterboxes to let everyone know about their plans. Once he succeeds in getting you to run off at the mouth, he jams his pitchfork into your shoulder as his way of saying, "Gotcha." His greatest delight comes in snatching defeat from victory at the last possible moment. The best way to let others know what you're going to do is to actually do it, all the way through to completion. The more confident you are that something good is about to happen, the less reason you have to risk putting your foot in your mouth. Your ego will be more than sufficiently assuaged, massaged, and patted after you have succeeded. What I'm talking about here is a simple piece of advice contained in the Zip the Lip theory, which states, if you've got something good going, shut up. The nice thing is that the more you succeed, the more reason you have to feel secure, which should result in you having less of an urge to talk about your plans and more of a desire to produce results. Billionaire babies. You've undoubtedly known at least one person whose bloated ego manifested itself with endless talk about multi-million-dollar deals. However, many hotshots who reside in the USA's first space colony, Los Angeles, take it one step further. Tinseltown egomaniacs don't fool around with millions. Los Angeles is the home of the billionaire babies, guys who don't concern themselves with mere million-dollar deal discussions. Yep, these are the flaky characters who like to talk in billions. The first time you encounter a billionaire baby, you assume he's putting you on. But when you finally realize he's serious, you begin scoping the room for possible escape routes. I once knew a seemingly intelligent Tinseltown guy who contracted a severe case of billionaire babyitis. He knew not one paltry millionaire. All the people in his deals were billionaires. At first, I thought it was just his way of figuratively expressing people's wealth. Ultimately, though, I became convinced that Tinselman actually believed there were carloads of billionaires running around loose on our planet, all of them dying to do deals with Southern California charlatans, of course. On a number of occasions, I met some of the billionaires he had mentioned. One drove a classic Rolls-Royce, which I later found out was on a month-to-month lease. Another one lived in a spectacular mansion, but it turned out that he was only a front for a group of investors who had put up the money to refurbish the estate with the intention of reselling it at a profit. And of course, there was Mr. Big Spender, who was being chased all over town by collection agents. I've known many wealthy people over the years, including a couple of real billionaires. And there's one thing they all seem to have in common. Not only do they not toss money around carelessly, they speak about it in reverent tones. A term like billion is not to be uttered cavalierly. All this calls to mind the BS theory, which states, when you BS others, you're merely being dishonest. But when you start believing your own BS, bankruptcy is probably just around the corner. Megalomaniacs, people who suffer from delusions of grandeur, are hopelessly caught up in the BS trap. Whenever you come in contact with such a self-delusive individual, don't stop to chat. Just smile, shake hands, bid him adieu, then walk as fast as you can in the other direction. A person who believes his own BS tends to make decisions based on the landfill of the mind, and anything anchored to landfill is doomed to crumble at the slightest sign of a tremor. Just make certain you're not around when the tremor occurs, because it can be extremely dangerous to your wealth. Avoid getting intertwined in the BS neurosis of others, and, even more important, be vigilant about making certain it doesn't rub off on you. One of the best ways to accomplish this is by never trying to do something you're not, by diligently avoiding ego satisfactions, and by focusing on total honesty in both your words and actions. Standing on principle, falling on ego. It's also important not to get sidetracked by irrelevant challenges. Learn to disregard irritations that are unrelated to your main objective. More often than not, when someone makes a fuss over a relatively minor point, it's really just his ego getting in the way of his own best interest. I prefer to avoid confrontations, mainly because they slow me down. If it's of monumental importance for the other guy to win a point that isn't relevant to my main objective, I'd just as soon give him the satisfaction. In fact, I'd prefer that we concentrate on nothing but non-essential points. Let the other guy believe he's winning the battle, while you remain focused on winning the war. When you argue, just for the sake of arguing, you're not acting in your rational self-interest. Your ego is in control, which means you're out of control. The fear factor. If you try to motivate associates or subordinates by instilling fear in them, that too is probably a case of ego guiding your actions. Try to rule out of fear is not in your best interest. It simply doesn't work over the long term, because those whom you think you have under control will be the very people who will fail to cooperate when you most need them. This is the centuries-old story of dictators being overthrown by their subjects. It's important to surround yourself with competent people, and competent people don't need to be controlled with an iron fist. As always, the best kind of associations are those that are voluntary. The road to rational decisions. I've already alluded to the wisdom of seeking long-term solutions in lieu of short-term patching, and it's especially true when it comes to clearing the financial hurdle. Short-term patching is the catalyst for jumping from the frying pan into the fire, especially where money is concerned. When you have financial problems, your instincts often prod you to base your decisions on the expediency of the moment, which almost always makes matters worse. The only way to build a solid foundation for financial success is to develop the self-discipline to think long-term. Interestingly, long-term solutions usually turn out to be the most expedient solutions as well. In fact, I've come to refer to the long-term solution approach as the slow, fast way. By solving a problem on a permanent basis, it's over and done with. It may cause temporary discomfort and initially take a little longer, but the payoff is that you don't have to address the problem again down the road. Self-interest. To clear the financial hurdle, it's important to focus on the reality of self-interest, not just yours, but that of everyone you're involved with. If there's nothing in it for the other guy, you may profit from him once, but in the long run, you're going to lose him as a customer, client, or business associate, and in the process, earn a bad reputation in the marketplace. You should make it a special point to concern yourself with the desires of those who represent potential value to you. This is what the term value for value is all about, and I'm convinced it is still the most certain formula for success. There has to be something in it for the other person if you expect him to do business with you in the future. As a bonus, word will spread that you're a solid person to deal with, which will result in still more people wanting to do business with you. Be straightforward and let the person on the other side of the negotiating table know that your objective is to make the best possible deal you can, but not at the expense of losing a long-term relationship with him. A one-time killing will rarely reap as much as a lifetime of entering into mutually profitable deals with someone. The miracle of simplicity. Over the years, I have observed a peculiar human trait, succinctly summed up in the life complication theory, which states, human beings, by nature, tend to seek ways to complicate their lives. Given a choice between a simple and complicated method to accomplish an objective, most people will opt for the more complicated course of action. This is one of those great mysteries of life for which there is no logical explanation. It's a source of unending fascination to me to note the lengths to which individuals will go not only to seek out discomfort entanglements, but to invent ingenious methods to avoid eliminating existing complications from their lives. This is especially true as it relates to clearing the financial hurdle. I am still amazed at the extent to which I went out of my way to complicate my business life when I was much younger. The time and money spent on building large organizations, setting up complex corporate structures, and becoming involved in deals from one coast to the other now seem incomprehensible to me. The result was that I never had time to engage in the one activity that is most likely to produce financial results: creative thinking. I was too busy working to carve out the time to think about making serious money. Today, no one impressed me less than the guy who madly shuffles papers as he talks on the phone, periodically interrupts his conversation to blurt out orders to his secretary, and at the same time motions to a visitor to have a seat, with a wink that implies he'll be with you in a minute. It's been my experience that most successful people tend to make their way through their daily obligations in a calm, low-key manner. Operating in a harried fashion can seriously decrease your odds of being around long enough to discover that money is only a means to an end. Further, as with crusades, there is weakness, not strength, in numbers. The larger the organization, the more people there are who have to be consulted before decisions can be made. Thus, the greater the opportunities for bureaucratic bungling, infighting, inefficiency, and confusion. That's why a small, efficient, well-run company can almost always beat a major corporation to the punch. The classic example of this is how Microsoft snuck up on and surpassed lethargic IBM. Big Blue never even saw Bill Gates and his cadre of nerds coming. This is the main reason that giant corporations are usually the ones who fight for so-called antitrust and anti-monopoly laws. The real purpose of such laws is to protect big business against smaller competitors who have an irritating habit of cutting into their profits. I, long ago, lost my appetite for being a high-priced babysitter, which, for all practical purposes, is what you are when you have the responsibility of overseeing a large staff of people. It becomes a form of self-imprisonment. You have to think about everything you do, from the clothes you wear to what you arrive at the office, because others are looking at you to set an example. The same goes for travel. In the old days, I believed that the really great deals were in faraway places, usually on the other side of the continent. But it's amazing how many of those too good to be true deals turned out to be illusions. As a result, I wasted an enormous amount of time and energy, not to mention thousands of dollars, in unnecessary travel expenses that could otherwise have been used for constructive projects that were easily accessible to me in my own backyard. In this regard, my memory reaches back to some poignant scenes from an old movie, Fanny, in which the main character of the same name was played by Leslie Caron. In the film, Fanny is desperately in love with a young man named Marius, and he with her. Fanny wants Marius to marry her, but Marius, in his words, is so divided, so torn. Marius relates to Fanny a story an old seaman had told him when he was just a boy. The mariner vividly described the isles beneath the winds where black trees grow, saying that when you cut them, they are gold inside and smell of camphor and pepper. That's when it happened. Marius continues, his eyes glimmering with excitement. This deep, painful wish I have. It makes me dizzy, as though I were falling forward always toward the sea. So Marius, despite his deep love for Fanny, goes off to sea in search of the wonders the old mariner had described. More than a year later, he returns home for a brief visit and calls on Fanny, who has by then married another man. In a dramatic scene, Fanny asks Marius if he had seen the isles beneath the winds. And Marius, in a somber tone, replies affirmatively. What were they like? Fanny further inquires. With a sad and wistful look in his eyes, Marius responds, Have you ever seen photographs of the craters of the moon? That's what they were like. Volcanic ash. Oh, Fanny, I left with such high hopes. The moral is that it's very easy to get carried away by the illusion of greener grass on the other side of the fence. When it comes to business dealings, those isles beneath the winds all too often turn out to be nothing more than volcanic ash. It's remarkable how much more efficient you can be in your own office, especially in this day and age of the internet, than on an airplane or in a hotel room. Another key aspect of simplicity is to rid yourself of involvement with big institutions. When I was the head of a public company, I spent a majority of my time either talking to or doing paperwork for bureaucrats at the American Stock Exchange, the SEC, Swift Execution Commission, and banks, on top of having to constantly appease directors, securities dealers, and stockholders. The main job of most high-level public company executives is to comply with regulations, mostly government regulations. That translates into mountains of paperwork, endless meetings with attorneys and accountants, and strategizing with fellow executives on how to appease this ever-expanding army of busybodies. With all the inherent wasted time and energy involved, I'm in awe of any high-level executive of a public company who is able to find the time to work on creating better products and services for his company's customers. Beware the sheiks. Being a writer has taught me the importance of not becoming sidetracked, regardless of how appealing an opportunity may appear to be. There is much wisdom in General Patton's advice about single-mindedness and relentlessly in striving toward your main objective. As I said in Chapter 1, no one can have all the candy in the store, and the sooner you face up to that reality, the sooner you can focus on the business of making money instead of bringing chaos into your life. Through the years, I've managed to develop the self-discipline to concentrate on one deal at a time and leave all the other deals to the rest of the world's entrepreneurs. For the past 2 decades, my motto has been, success means doing what you do best and letting others do the rest. It is also important to be highly selective about the deals you work on. There simply are too many ifs and buts and maybes in most deals. Worst of all, too many deals require becoming involved with a lot of people, and one of your main objectives should be to deal with as few people as possible. People problems complicate your life, and complications mean roadblocks between you and the freedom that lies on the other side of the financial hurdle. When I was a master at complicating my life, every overhyped deal in the world seemed to find its way to my desk. Condominiums in the Mojave Desert, bank charters in the Aruba, a process for converting cow dung into bricks in Bombay, you name it. Whatever it was, I probably saw it and probably seriously considered it. Then there were the sheiks. I still have nightmares about those waves of sheiks coming at me, wearing Armani suits and Arabian headscarves and boasting about all the Arab oil money they claim to represent. The result? After years spent looking at and working on hundreds of deals, I never once saw any Arab oil money change hands. Maybe such exotic capital is out there somewhere, but if so, you can be certain it is changing hands on a level that is far above your head and mine. The Saudi royal family has all the bases covered. They hardly need you or me to come up with safe and lucrative places for parking their money. Though Americans are way out front when it comes to the number of flakes per square foot of geography, we certainly don't have a monopoly on con man. The Arabs, Indians, and Chinese all have more than their fair share of flakes. Because we live in a world of delusions, a person's status as an expert, along with his Arab legitimacy, tends to increase in direct proportion to the distance he travels from his home country, especially if he has a white scarf wrapped around his head and is wearing a 3-piece suit. Bottom line, all other things being equal, it's a good idea to focus on simple deals close to home. Don't allow yourself to get sidetracked by every exotic deal that comes floating by, no matter how the guy presenting it is dressed. Remember, creative thinking is the most important of all business activities, and the more you simplify your life, the more time you will have to engage in it. Resist the temptation to be an around-the-clock wheeler dealer. You can make more money than you can ever hope to spend without reviewing every deal that's circulating in the flake network. A frenetic life only succeeds in cluttering your mind, and a cluttered mind is self-defeating. Profit is directly related to the number of uncluttered, creative hours one is able to carve out on his daily schedule. Taking hold of the wheel. If there's one thing that makes me nervous, it's sitting in the passenger seat of a car. Though I dislike driving, I do so because I like being in control. I have repeatedly emphasized the importance of acting out of choice rather than chance. And that's possible only if you're in control of your actions. While it's true that there are endless factors in life that are beyond your control, it's also true that there are many areas of life over which you do have control. First and foremost, you have the power to control your awareness. No one can prevent you from being alert and rational. People often fail to concentrate on what's going on around them, which is unfortunate because the best opportunities often drift into your life when you're least expecting them. In addition, people are often too focused on some misfortune they have endured to recognize the opportunities that continually cross their path. And of the few who do recognize those opportunities, only a small percentage have the alertness and/or courage to move quickly enough to take advantage of them. On the other hand, there will always be that small fraction of the population that is not only aware, but ready and willing to step up to the plate and take advantage of any opportunity that comes their way. The person who is prepared doesn't need much of an opening to take action. People who see themselves as victims of bad luck have a difficult time understanding that the surest road to success is to create one's own breaks. Sadly, most of them are victims of the waiting to be discovered theory, which states, if you're waiting for something to happen, you're not in control of your destiny. Don't wait for something to happen. Make it happen. Self-discipline. Self-discipline is the essence of self-control. It results in an efficient use of one's time, which in turn results in more time for creative endeavors. There will always be an abundance of distractions around you. The lure of the opposite sex, phone calls, spectator sports, television. So it's up to you not to allow such distractions to guide your life. Of primary importance in this regard is to learn how to say no, both to people and activities. When it comes to self-discipline, you have to be careful not to delude yourself. For example, people often try to convince themselves that certain social gatherings are helpful to their business. Personally, I've always been skeptical of the efficacy of cocktail parties, golf matches, and business lunches. Based on first-hand experience, I believe that the most meaningful business progress is made when talking face-to-face with someone in his or my office. While the other guy is exchanging off-color jokes with a prospect over a 3-martini lunch, I prefer to be in a more serious setting where all the parties can more easily focus on business. The confusion crutch. Whether it's a career decision or how to handle a specific financial problem, you should always be careful when it comes to accepting the advice of others. Listening to too many opinions can be fatal to your financial aspirations. Every industry has its discouragement fraternity. People who go to great lengths to try to convince you that you can't make it in their field. Because of their own insecurity, consciously or unconsciously, they are prepared to do anything within their power to prevent you from ever getting out of the starting gate. The reason for this is that you represent competition to them. Their implied message is, How dare you do so presumptuous as to think you can succeed in this business when you have no experience, which we're trying to prevent you from gaining by convincing you that you shouldn't come into this business in the first place. The reality is that you have to start somewhere. It's like a banker who won't consider you for a loan until you can prove you don't need it. Do yourself a favor and don't expect others in the industry of your choice to help you get started. On the contrary, assume that there is an army of neurotic individuals out there who will go to great lengths to put obstacles in your path. Never forget that no one owes you anything, and rest assured they know it. It's up to you, and you alone, to decide when you're ready to make the move into your chosen field. You don't need so-called credentials. You don't need the approval of others. You don't need the crutch of reassurance from friends. All you need is to be ready, and you are the best judge of when that is. If you believe your time has arrived, ignore the negative input of the discouragement fraternity and boldly move forward without regard to what anyone else thinks. Playing your own game. It's not what you say or do that counts, but what your posture is when you say or do it. There's no question that a person can exercise a great deal of control over his own posture. Someone else may have more financial strength than you, but he cannot force you to play by his rules without your consent. A rational man, said Ayn Rand, never leaves his interests at the mercy of any one person or single specific concrete. He may need clients, but not any one particular client. He may need a job, but not any one particular job. People often think of this as bluffing, but you're not bluffing. You really mean what you say. Personally, I make it a point never to bluff. I'm careful about throwing out ultimatums to people because once I do, I follow through. You can only afford to throw down the gauntlet if you're good at what you do. If you don't bring value to the table, being tough is an exercise in futility. Once you decide how you want to play the game, your first task should be to pick the right person or persons with whom to play it. It's easy to have things your way against a weak opponent, but the tougher the opposition, the more vigilant you have to be when it comes to setting the tempo and guidelines. The strength of your posture will, to a great extent, depend upon the parties with whom you choose to deal, which in turn will go a long way toward determining your success. In particular, if you're having financial difficulties, don't try to play in the big leagues. When you're operating from a position of financial weakness, the tone of your voice and the look in your eyes give you away. If you can't afford to lose, it's not only hard to hide your financial weakness, it's difficult to make rational decisions, and almost impossible to avoid being intimidated by financially stronger opponents. If at times you have no choice but to be involved with someone who's on a much higher financial level than you, there are two weapons that can help you control the situation. The first is to make certain you're good at your craft. If it's obvious that you're someone who can create value, the other person will respect you even if you don't have staying power. As a result, he may be willing to deal with you for reasons of pure self-interest without using strong-arm tactics. Ironically, the second weapon works best when you're destitute. Even in those bad old days in Beverly Hills, when I was groveling around on all fours and nursing my leper sores, I came to the conclusion that I still had one advantage over most of the opposition. I had everything to gain and nothing to lose. Because I knew I was at the very bottom, I took a strong stance when it came to drawing the line on not being pushed around or allowing anyone to intimidate me. It's also a good idea to remember this principle when you are the one with the upper hand. Never push the other person so far that he has nothing to lose, because he might just decide to jump off a financial cliff and pull you along with him. Getting paid. There's nothing more frustrating than putting 110% effort into one deal after another and consistently ending up on the short end of the stick. Remember, no matter how well you perform, your efforts are only a means to an end: getting paid. Your main focus should always be on the precise method by which funds will be transferred from someone else's bank account into yours. This seemingly simple proposition almost never happens by accident, and almost never without resistance on the part of the party who is supposed to pay you. To underscore the importance of what I've just said, it's the only sentence in this entire book that I'm not only going to repeat, but repeat in bold italics. This seemingly simple proposition almost never happens by accident, and almost never without resistance on the party who is supposed to pay you. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. Should you come to the conclusion that you can't control the payment of monies due you, then the only solution is to bypass the person who is supposed to pay you and take matters into your own hands. Think of it as the sure theory, which states the only way you can be certain that your objective will be accomplished is to take matters into your own hands and not expect any help from anyone. This kind of independent mindset puts you in control of your own destiny. When you count on outside help, you're out of control. One final but important note on this subject: checks don't count until the funds have cleared the bank. Money game tactics. One of the things that makes winning in the business world so difficult is that every player brings a different repertoire of tactics to the game, which means you can't wed yourself to anyone's strategy. The only thing you should assume will never change is that everyone you deal with will act in his own self-interest at all times. Whether or not you or I choose to acknowledge this reality is irrelevant. Remember, realities exist irrespective of what we choose to believe. If you refuse to accept this basic reality of human nature, you have no hope for long-term success, even if you do everything else right. Let me make it clear that I am in no way advocating on anything goes philosophy. On the contrary, the most rational way to look out for one's own best interest is to focus on creating value for others. But that doesn't mean you can't count on everyone else being as enlightened as you are on the subject of value creation. Also, always keep in mind that when someone does create value for you, he is still acting in his own self-interest. It just means he understands that helping you get what you want is the best way to get what he wants. It's this kind of motivation, enlightened self-interest, that drives the free market. Financialese. You should make every effort to learn the language of the money game, financialese, in order to correctly interpret the remarks of other players. Some translation examples of financialese include: statement, don't worry about a thing. Translation, you'd better start worrying about everything. Statement, Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Translation: don't bother me. Statement: I would never do anything dishonest. Life is too short to make enemies. Translation: I'll do whatever it takes to get the best of you. Life is too short to worry about making enemies. Statement: my reputation is beyond reproach. You can check me out with my bank. Translation: I've managed to accumulate a lot of money by shafting guys like you who were stupid enough to believe that all they needed to do was check me out with my bank. Of course, not every opponent who crosses your path will be speaking financialese, but prudent to assume he is. By doing so, if it turns out that financialese is his native tongue, you won't be left standing in your jockey shorts, scratching your head and trying to figure out what happened to your clothes. The cash flow game. The object of the cash flow game is to use the other guy's cash for as long as possible. Big corporations and wealthy individuals understand the truth embodied in the financial geometric growth theory, which states money tends to grow exponentially in smart hands, the end result being that the rich get richer. Consider the following list of good things that the cash-rich individual or company has going for him or it. Excess cash can be put to work in the best combination of low-risk, high-yield investments that can earn the investor still more cash. Cash tends to draw the best people and best deals to those who are known to have lots of it. Cash provides staying power, an intangible that all too often is the difference between success and failure. The cash-rich individual is more likely to make sound, rational decisions. Cash can be leveraged, often without its owner having to put up any money at all, as the legendary Meshulam Rickless used to point out when he was building his McCrory Corp empire. The intelligent use of a cash-rich balance sheet can produce a river of additional cash, what he referred to as the effective non-use of cash. The point is that cash begets cash, but in ways that are not understood by and not visible to the average person. The only limitation to how much can be made from a cache of cash is the creativity of the individual who possesses it. In the words of Stuart Wilde, the secret to money is having some. Unfortunately, this theory works in reverse as well. When you're squeezed for cash, bad things tend to happen. Consider, when word gets around that you're in financial trouble, good deals no longer find their way to your desk. With a lack of staying power, you're always dealing from a position of weakness. You're likely to make scared money decisions, an example of short-term patching, instead of sound decisions based on a long-term perspective. You have no leverage, and as a result, no one is willing to lend you money or invest in you. You have to spend an enormous amount of time and energy putting out fires, while cash-rich opponents spend their time thinking of creative ways to increase their cash positions. Comparing the two possible ways in which geometric growth can work, it's not hard to understand why savvy players place such a big emphasis on cash. It would be difficult to think of a unique cash flow scheme because the world's largest corporations have already thought of every conceivable way to get their hands on the other guy's cash, interest-free. The so-called security deposit paid to owners of rental properties is an old favorite. So too is the non-interest-bearing checking account, wherein banks usually make you pay a service charge for allowing them to have the free use of your money. And many basic monthly charges, such as the Internet ISP services, are billed in advance before the customer actually uses the service for the period being billed. American Express bluntly prefers to its version of the cash flow game as the float. The company sells traveler checks to people, knowing that an average of 65 days will elapse between the time they are purchased and the time the buyer cashes the checks. During the 65-day period, a large percentage of the cash is invested in safe instruments such as tax-exempt municipal bonds. You may not have the power to employ the cash flow schemes of giant corporations, but you can still use this valuable principle to your advantage on a smaller scale. Always proceed from the axiom that every day that someone else's money is in your pocket, you are that much ahead of the game. Likewise, every day that your money is in someone else's pocket, you are losing the use of that cash, along with all the benefits it can provide you via the financial geometric growth theory. To the extent it can be avoided, never relinquish cash without putting up a fight. Be vigilant about trying to hang on to as many chips as possible for the longest possible period of time. Legal man, the game's master croupier. In a rational, ethical world, legal man would never have been allowed on the playing field. Unfortunately, we don't live in a rational, ethical world. In any event, it's too late, because legal man is already solidly entrenched as one of the game's legitimate players. Legal man is that lecherous subspecies of Homo sapiens who dashes onto the scene in the closing stages of your deal, brandishing his satchel of little deal-killing goodies, just in time to bring everything to a screeching halt. The first thing he says is something like, "I want you to know that I'm not one of those deal-killing attorneys, so you can relax. It's up to my victim, client, to make his own decisions." Translation: the only way this deal's going to close is over my dead body. Ha ha ha. Legal man plays his certification role to the hilt. He's the classic expert, the guy who can tell you all the reasons why you can't do something. In his case, it's not a matter of trying to convince you that you're incapable. Rather, he either implies that there is a mysterious legal reason why something you want to do can't be done, or suggests that it would be a bad business move on your part. How legal men manage to get into the game as a business expert, in addition to an interpreter of the law, has always mystified me. Legal man has been endowed with incredible gall. He not only got into the game without bringing anything but his law degree to the table, but he managed to finesse his way into the role of chief skimmer. While the suckers roll the dice, legal man, like a croupier at a crap table, relentlessly rakes his take off the top. Technically, of course, he refers to his skimming tactics as legal fees, insisting that he is providing a legitimate service for his client. To put it in more gentle terms, one might say that all he is guilty of is taking money from the other players in the game in exchange for creating problems for them. Whatever words you choose to describe this phenomenon, the result is the same. Over the long haul, what legal man really accomplishes is to redistribute chips from the pockets of the legitimate players into his own. The name of the game from legal man's standpoint is to keep the hostilities flying back and forth, stir up endless litigation, and drag out every confrontation as long as possible. Time is always on legal man's side, because each day that the fighting continues is another day that he has the opportunity to rake chips onto his pile with his nifty croupier stick. Mercifully, once he's pilfered the last bit of gold from all the other players' teeth, he picks up his little bag of deal-killing goodies, spreads his cape, and disappears into the suburbs to enjoy his evening martini. Carl Sandburg described it best when asked, "When the lawyers are through, what is there left? Can a mouse nibble at it and find anything to fasten a tooth in?" Great legalman myths. One of the main reasons legal man is able to get by with such outrageous and avaricious behavior is that he has succeeded in enshrouding himself in a cloud of mystery. He relies heavily on the government protection racket for the legal profession. Only those with government-approved licenses are granted permission to carry a croupier stick. The naive and easily intimidated misconstrue this to mean that only legal man has a thorough understanding of the law and that it is beyond the comprehension of mere laymen. Which, of course, is nonsense. Yet, millions of people continue to believe that the services a legal man performs are sacred and that his government-approved monopoly gives him some sort of mystical powers of understanding that you and I can never hope to acquire. The truth, of course, is that you can get a divorce from a corporation and even die without the aid of legal man. Aside from legal man's tendency to be lazy, negligent, and incompetent, my experience with him is that he has great difficulty just trying to draft an intelligible sentence. Because of the latter defect, many years ago, I decided to take matters into my own hands and draft my own contracts. That's the only way I could be confident that everyone involved would actually be able to understand what was agreed upon. The Adventures of Legal Boy. Then there's the myth about legal man's innate superior intelligence. Sorry, but my first-hand encounters with legal men have convinced me that, as a group, attorneys are a bit on the dull side. In this regard, I vividly recall an experience I had with an early evolutionary form of legal man, commonly referred to as Legal Boy. Legal Boy was one of those self-delusive little twits who had only recently snuck into the game, fresh out of his final course in law school and brimming over with Perry Mason fantasies. Having gotten top grades in circumcision 401, 2, and 3, he was eager to begin wielding the spanking new pink croupier's stick his family had given him as a graduation gift. Of course, sophisticated players in the money game usually just ignore Legal Boy. True, they might engage in an occasional chuckle or two as they watch him running around in his $150 three-piece polyester suit and shouting incoherent legal phrases at anyone who will listen. But for the most part, they don't really acknowledge his existence. Even so, if Legal Boy is persistent enough, he will eventually find a few naive souls willing to listen to his gibberish, which is how he begins the arduous task of building a client list. In this particular case, one of those naive souls happened to be a creditor of mine from my Beverly Hills leprosy days. He had obtained a default judgment against me in the amount of $24,000 because at the time he filed suit against me, I was in such dire financial straits that I couldn't afford to defend myself. I only owed his client $8,000, but the law allows a plaintiff to file for treble damages, meaning that when you're sued, there is an added penalty for being so poor that you can't afford legal fees. That's right. If you can't afford to defend yourself, you have to pay 3 times the actual amount of your debt. Somehow or other, my creditor had stumbled upon Legal Boy at just about the time I was starting to take significant steps up the financial ladder. He explained to this giant of jurisprudence that he had already obtained a judgment, but he hadn't been able to collect on it. which is all Legal Boy needed to hear to shift into his go-get-'em routine. He immediately started calling me several times a day and bombarding me with the silliest threats imaginable. Like any overzealous cubby, his manner of speech was rapid and incoherent. My adversary completely bought into Legal Boy's dramatic performance and played the role of mesmerized client to the hilt. It was Legal Boy's moment in the sun, and he was loving every minute of it. With his confidence increasing daily, he relentlessly pressed forward with his "just watch me nail this tortoise" routine. Legal Boy knew where my office was, so he could have served me with judgment debtor papers at any time. To my pleasant surprise, however, he didn't. My only guess as to why he failed to take this incredibly easy step was that he must have done exceptionally well in the negligence 401 when he was in law school. Had he taken the trouble to serve me, he would have quickly discovered that all the money I possessed, about $100,000, was in a checking account at a bank right next door to my office. Then all he would have needed to do was walk into the bank with the sheriff, and in 5 minutes they would have handed him $24,000, the treble damages amount, in cash. My creditor was no longer willing to accept the $8,000 I actually owed him. Nope, he wanted the $24,000 treble damages, and that just didn't fit in with my moral code. Of course, even in those pre-computer days, any entrepreneur worth his salt could find out in a day or two in what bank or banks any person in his hometown had accounts. But you didn't learn simple real-world skills like that in law school. You learned them by actively participating in the money game, for the most part through adversity. Since Legal Boy lacked experience and possessed a cerebral mass the size of a pea, he apparently didn't know how to go about such a routine procedure. Luckily for me, he didn't even take the trouble to serve papers on the bank right next door to my office, which was the most obvious place to start searching for money. He was too wrapped up in his hard-nosed negotiations performance to take any meaningful action on behalf of his client. From the outset of this little financial skirmish, I had figured that, considering my vulnerability, it would be a bargain if I could settle the matter for something in the area of $13,000. But when it was all over, Legal Boy, who had put on an absolutely brilliant performance for his entranced client, ended up nailing the tortoise for the grand sum of $10,000. Not in cash, mind you, but in monthly installments over a period of a year. A great example of how even someone in my then vulnerable position could find a way to win at the cash flow game. Considering that I had the use of varying percentages of the $10,000 for up to a year, there is no question that I came out far better than if I had agreed to pay the original $8,000 in one lump sum to Legal Boy's client. After the settlement was signed, Legal Boy bristled with pride until I feared the plastic buttons on his vest would pop off and ruin his image. His client was in utter awe. How in the world do these legal brains do it? He must have been thinking. I guess it's just as well he never knew that Legal Boy had just cost him $14,000 by not being competent enough to simply walk into the bank next door to my office and get him more than twice the amount of the eventual settlement in cash without having to go through his ferocious cubby routine. What's nice about this true story is that everyone got what he wanted. Legal Boy raked in a fee for costing his client money, solidified his relationship with his client, and, of prime importance, got his ego massaged. The comatose client believed justice had been done and that he had succeeded in collecting a debt that was owed to him, apparently finding a way to rationalize the fact that he had ended up with only 40% of the face amount of the judgment, less croupier's fees, of course. With victory in hand, he could then go on to help perpetuate some of the most wildly accepted legal man and legal boy myths. The tortoise, of course, was the happiest of all. Not only did I save $14,000 that a sharper version of Legal Boy could easily have snatched from my bank account, I also gained the use of varying percentages of the $10,000 settlement money interest-free over a period of 1 year. If you have a little vino handy, a toast is in order. Long live Legal Boy. Defending against the croupier's stick. If you're one of the legitimate players in the money game, you should make it a high priority to minimize the effects of legal man whenever and wherever possible. The first step toward achieving this end is to wake up to the reality that legal man is just an average schmo, or Joe, with a croupier's license who is highly skilled at perpetuating myths about himself and his services. It's also important to get it out of your head that everything is a legal problem. Over a period of time, I came to realize that most of my legal problems weren't legal problems at all. They were just problems that I could resolve much better myself at no cost. It ultimately became clear to me that, more often than not, so-called legal problems began to appear after a legal man entered the picture. The original problem between two parties usually becomes relegated to a minor status with the advent of the new, more serious problems that legal man manages to introduce to virtually every situation. Through experience, I became quite good at anticipating the kinds of problems that legal man was adept at injecting into an otherwise harmonious situation, and I put a great deal of effort into trying to head him off at the pass. I did this by addressing potential phantom problems before he had a chance to bring them up. And when I discussed them, I never talked in terms of problems. Instead, I referred to them as items to be taken care of, and I saw it as my job to follow through and take care of such items. Unfortunately, your resistance to using legal man is only half the battle, because the other party to your deal may decide to call him in unilaterally. And when that happens, it almost always spells trouble. If, for example, you sell real estate or insurance for a living, you know that the appearance of legal man can all too often result in your sale falling apart at the 11th hour. In business like these, where it's hard to keep legal man out of the fray, your best bet is to try out finesse him. However, even when you become skilled at doing so, he's still going to succeed a good deal of the time. So never make the mistake of underestimating him. Legal man is normally very good at his chosen profession, deal killing, so stay alert at all times. Of course, the ideal is to be in a business where you don't have to become involved with people who are so unsophisticated that they think it's illegal to consummate a transaction without legal man's approval. I believe it's more than just a coincidence that I've closed some of the biggest deals of my life without legal man's input. It's also instructive to note that in every one of those deals, the other party not only was sophisticated, but wanted to conclude the deal as much as I did. Thus, sophistication and a high level of motivation are two keys worth looking for when searching for makeable deals. It's the unsophisticated individual who is most likely to call in legal man and allow himself to be worked into a tizzy by artificially created problems. I cannot deny that there are times when you may actually need legal man, but you should exhaust all other avenues before you resort to bringing him into the picture. Allowing legal man out of his cage should be looked upon as a measure of last resort. And when, and if you do have to call him, be prepared for a long, drawn-out battle. Also, check your bank balance because the billing damages are likely to be worse than your original legal problem. All this first-hand experience with legal man can be summed quite simply up in the legal proper use theory, which states there's only one kind of situation in which legal man's services are valuable to a client. When the client has decided he wants to back out of a deal he has already agreed to, but is too embarrassed to say so, legal man can make it happen. All other things being equal, if you're serious about achieving a high percentage rate when it comes to closing deals, your best bet is to lock legal man in his cage and throw away the key. Uncle Sam, the only player who plays with guns. With the government, you have a problem of a completely different dimension. While a legal man sneaks into the game under the fence and uses a croupier stick to grab your chips, the government uses force to invite itself in. That pulls all the other players at a decided disadvantage because it's hard to maneuver around a bullet. Of course, the average magoo or ostrich doesn't see or refuses to see the reality that the government uses the threat of force to get what it wants. There are many reasons for his detachment from reality. One is that he is intimidated through custom and tradition into blindly cooperating with those in positions of power. Second, he is often intimidated into peaceful cooperation through the government's use of slogans, particularly patriotic slogans. Finally, the government's monopoly on the use of force is what allows it to maintain control through the unspoken threat of violence without its actually having to employ such force. It's no wonder that an anything-goes attitude prevails in business when you consider that one of the players is allowed to use guns to steal from everyone else in the game. See in this light, the financial hurdle becomes a game played by you and your competitors, using your wits and skills to make money by creating better products and services while at the same time trying to protect your assets from the greatest of all robber barons, the government. Never deceive yourself by ignoring the reality that the government is your chief adversary when it comes to getting ahead financially. All your competitors combined are not as formidable a foe as government, simply because they are not allowed to use force against you. One time, loud and clear, when it comes to your financial well-being, the government is not your friend. It is your worst enemy. Government mythology, a study in word usage. Compared to the mystic behind which the government has managed to hide, myths about legal man are rather mild. It's amazing what can be done when political thugs have virtually unlimited money to spend on propaganda. And through the phenomenon of gradualism, the propaganda becomes accepted by most of the sleepwalking public. Another clever use of words is demonstrated by the fact that the government itself is thought of as a living entity by millions of otherwise rational individuals. But the government does not have wants, needs, desires, and emotions of its own. The word government is nothing more than a label given to a group of individuals who draw paychecks from the public trowel and wield virtually unchecked power over those citizens who pay their salaries. One of the reasons government acts in a conglomeration of contradictory ways and why virtually everything it attempts to do ends in colossal failure is the very fact that it is not a living entity. As a result, the most powerful politicians and bureaucrats acting in their own self-interests are constantly struggling against one another, vying for ever more power and trying to bring about legislation which they desire. To think of the government as some sort of sacred entity is to believe that the human beings who actually comprise it are sacred. Of course, many people cherish the government because they see it as a means to their personal ends. But the government is not a means to an end for the individual whose objective is to look out for number one, and who finds it contemptible to violate the rights of others. The question is, if what the government has to offer is so great for the individual, why must it use force to get people to go along with its program? The obvious answer is that what the government offers is not great. It is restraint of freedom. The practical consequences of government are that it uses the threat of violence either to 1. Force you to do something you do not want to do, 2. Force you to stop doing something you do want to do, or 3. Force you to give up something that's rightfully yours. Setting the example for an anything goes society. Then there's the mythology of law. Aside from the fact that the government's use of force creates an anything goes society, its laws set a bad example for the masses. It's a case of monkey see, monkey do. If Big Brother can legally confiscate the assets of individuals, force them into kill or be killed situations, patriotically referred to as war, interfere with their sex lives, and commit thousands of other violations of natural rights, you can't blame the poor guy who's just trying to make ends meet for having an anything goes attitude as well. You don't have to have a very high level of awareness to realize that one doesn't prove that a law is right or moral merely by stating that it is a law. The only relevant consideration with regard to government laws is whether or not they are in violation of natural law and natural rights. Academicians have used various terms to define natural law and natural rights, but I believe they can be summed up rather simply. Every man possesses a natural right to pursue his own happiness in any way he so chooses and retain ownership over all the fruits of his labor, so long as he does not forcibly interfere with the same rights in others. To say that laws are necessary to protect individuals sounds great until you realize that most laws interfere with the freedom of individuals, particularly the endless number of absurd victimless crime laws on the books. How can any group of people, whether it goes by the name of government or any other moniker, know what's good for you when you have desires, ambition, needs, beliefs, and standards that are different from those of anyone else? How can others act in your best interest when they don't even know you? Only you can decide what's best for you, and anyone who tries to do it for you, especially by utilizing force, is an aggressor and is in violation of natural law. No matter what kind of wording you employ in an attempt to ignore the facts, the truth always remains. Government restrains you, and restraint violates natural law. And when it comes to your financial well-being, that restraint manifests itself as a barrier that keeps you from transacting business freely in the marketplace, which is why government is the biggest obstacle to your clearing the financial hurdle. How formidable is the government as an opponent? All government does to you is steal a large portion of your personal income, close the doors to your business if you don't fork over a specified percentage of your profits, make the money you do retain worth less every day by printing currency with no backing behind it, charge you rent for living in the home you thought you owned, euphemistically referred to as property taxes, tell you what minimums you have to pay your employees and whom you must hire, dictate what you can charge for your products and services through price controls handed down by the FTC, pass judgment on what products you can sell through the FDA, and the real coup de grace, make it illegal for you to compete against its own poorly run monopolies such as the United States Postal Service. A walk through Central Park at midnight is safer than having benevolent government watching over you. Defending against the monster. Over the past several decades, thanks in great part to our modern information age, government's mystique and sanctity have been rapidly eroding. The facts are becoming too noticeable in your pocketbook, your home, and in many other aspects of your life. Is there any way to put an end to this aggression? Not completely, but you can certainly do a number of things to hinder the government's ability to squash your efforts to succeed. For one, always start from the assumption that if you come up with a way to make a profit by creating a product or service that market values, sooner or later the government will try to make it illegal. In other words, circumstances will continually change. If you accept this reality, you're in a much better position to move in another direction when the rules shift. Always make a concerted effort to avoid as much contact with the government as possible. It drives the power holders crazy when they don't have a means of keeping tabs on your day-to-day activities. But even with their millions of employees, drones, and internet snooping techniques, they can't watch over everyone around the clock. In order to compensate for this deficiency in the system, they've set up a network of regulatory agencies and commissions, the number and scope of which are staggering. These bodies, example, the SEC, FTC, FCC, FDA, CAB, are of course unconstitutional in every respect. But from the standpoint of looking out for number one, that's irrelevant, because the fact is that they exist whether or not you or I like it. Remember, our objective is to find the best ways to deal with reality rather than trying to change things over which we have little or no control. All of these agencies are headed by non-elected bureaucrats who have virtual carte blanche to make or break any individual or company. More often than not, their arbitrary regulations see to it that competition is eliminated, which protects giant corporations and guarantees that consumers will pay higher prices for inferior products and services than they would in a free market. If you're in business for yourself, my best advice to you regarding government is to try to pick an industry or occupation that's regulated as little as possible. And if you're already in a heavily regulated business and don't believe it's practical to get out, the best thing you can do is keep a low profile and stay out of the way of applicable regulatory agencies. Never take regulatory agencies on head-to-head. You'll only be wasting valuable time, energy, and money. The deck is stacked against you from the start, so that even if you win in court, the feds will see to it that you lose down the road. Finally, even if you do manage to stay out of an industry or occupation not presently burdened with a strong-arm government oversight agency, you should still operate on the assumption that such will not always be the case. It's always wise to keep in mind the changing circumstances theory and be prepared to make your move when busybody government hacks decides to step in and start changing the rules of the game. Murphy's Ghost. Finally, there is the player you can always count on to disrupt your best laid plans, the ghost of Old Man Murphy. As I previously stated, Murphy doesn't discriminate. He's happy to inject problems into just about anyone's life in a wide variety of areas, including love, friendship, and health. But nothing is quite as exhilarating to him as causing people to trip over the financial hurdle. Being a ghost, he is, of course, invisible, but the problems he creates to thwart your every financial move are not. Can you do anything to stop him? You certainly can't fight something you can't see, so the only answer is to try to prepare yourself for his inevitable appearances at the worst possible time. I believe that all old man Murphy really wants is a little respect. It's only when you start getting overconfident and assuming that you have everything under control, when you can't see how anything possibly can go wrong, that you raise Murphy's ire and are in danger of having him hand you your head in a Ziploc bag. The truth is that he's a relatively docile ghost, so long as you heed his law. Perhaps you're one of those people whom Murphy has treated so shabbily that you haven't even been able to get out of the starting gate. If so, don't despair. He's just testing your mettle. A wise elderly gentleman once told me, after I had long tried in vain to clear the financial hurdle, that once you get the hang of it, once you start making money, riches come so quickly and in such great abundance that if you wonder why you had so much trouble succeeding all these years. At the time, I found his remarks hard to believe, but first-hand experience has proven to my satisfaction that he was absolutely right. Once you've got it, let's assume for a moment that you've finally managed to clear the financial hurdle, meaning you've achieved enough financial success to do as you please. Now what? Should you just kick back and relax? To do so, as many have found, is a surefire formula for boredom and unhappiness. So even after you've achieved financial success, there's ongoing work to be done if your objective is to look out for number one. For starters, it's important for your long-term happiness not to allow money to change you into something you're not, which means you must be vigilant about advertising the real you to the rest of the world. Once you get on top financially, your ego should require a lot less nourishment, so there's no need to put on airs. If you start taking yourself too seriously, you are tempting the financial abyss to pull you down again. Also, if you're able to handle success, don't expect others to accept it without neurotic envy and jealousy pangs. Though you may not change, you can count on other people to alter their attitudes toward you. It's part of the price you pay for success. Don't be so naive as to expect everyone to sit passively and allow you to enjoy your newfound success. Often, such unpleasantness will manifest itself in slander, which, as I discussed, stems from jealousy and self-contempt. The less someone's self-esteem, the more he is likely to resent your success. But it's nice to know that while there is nothing you can do to change the attitude of others toward you, you can choose to ignore them. Breeding ground for guilt. It's nonsense to believe that your success causes others to suffer, unless they're neurotic, which is something over which you have no control. So you should be proud of your achievements. If you are fortunate enough to gain financial independence, don't allow others to prevent you from enjoying it. It's irrational to think that just because there are people who live in poverty, you should feel guilty about your success. Unless someone else is poor because you robbed him, no poverty-stricken individual should be an obstacle to your happiness. On the contrary, as a result of your financial success, you will have made a great contribution to society because you won't be a burden to the rest of the world. An added plus is that success puts you in a position to help people you deem to be in need if it is your desire to do so. The worst case of wealth guilt complexes are often seen in people who have inherited rather than earned their fortunes. We've all seen enough of this sad phenomenon to suspect that such individuals often feel they don't deserve their wealth. If an individual suffers from his neurosis, the rational thing for him to do is to use his wealth as a base for creating even more wealth, rather than sit around and engage in self-flagellation. In this vein, I recently read an alarming article about a group of wealthy, guilt-ridden heirs. In an effort to cleanse themselves of their self-imposed guilt, they had formed an organization for the purpose of figuring out socially useful ways to give away much of the wealth they had inherited. How sad that these confused individuals felt compelled to waste potentially productive creative energy, not to mention capital, on such an unproductive project. Their mistake was to allow neurotic societal misfits and have-nots to saddle them with guilt feelings for something they not only were not responsible for, but which was not harming anyone else. Who shall rule? If you don't allow people to get to you via jealousy or guilt ploys, the only thing that can stop you from enjoying your financial success is you. Your attitude toward money is critical to your happiness. Either you control your money or it will control you. There are two diametrically opposed ways in which money can gain the upper hand on you. The first is, if you let money burn a hole in your pocket, if you've never possessed serious money before, it's very easy to get carried away with spending it. If your leap over the financial hurdle was difficult, it's quite natural to want to enjoy your newly created wealth to the fullest extent possible. A little restraint, however, is in order. Don't enjoy your wealth so much and so fast that you wake up one morning only to find yourself back at square one. A far more rational approach to handling prosperity is summarized in the touchies, no touchies theory, which states, the wise individual accumulates two piles of chips, one labeled touchies and one labeled no touchies. The touchies are the chips you use to enjoy life, houses, cars, vacations, and other material possessions. The no touchies are an insurance policy that gives you the security of knowing that if you happen to make a few bad decisions, or old man Murphy rains extra hard on your parade, you won't be faced with the challenge of having to start from scratch again. Just as important, money also can control you by making you overly fearful of losing it. Almost as bad as living beyond your means is living beneath your means. When you do so, money becomes an end in itself. Money can buy possessions and labor that not only make your life more comfortable, but can directly and indirectly give you the ultimate reward for crossing the financial freedom. What good is money if you still have to perform tasks you dislike? Tasks that you easily could afford to pay others to do for you. If you're so afraid of losing your money that it's a traumatic experience every time you need to come up with a few dollars to pay for something you want, you haven't really gained your freedom. Rather, you've only succeeded in imprisoning yourself. Put another way, if you allow money to rule you rather than the other way around, you're out of control, which means you are not in a position to make rational decisions. The most fickle friend. How sweet it is at the top, the luxuries, the applause, the attention. Unfortunately, it's at the precise moment when you're enjoying it most that you're in the greatest danger of losing it all. So fast that it's hard, from your lofty vantage point, to even imagine. Never become so focused on enjoying your success that delude yourself into believing you're infallible. You can be certain competitors are plotting, Murphy's ghost is lying in wait, and the government is once again planning to change the rules of the game. Above all, recognize that circumstances will continually change, and if you aren't ready for such a change, you're likely to get blindsided. In reminding myself how quickly fame can slip away, I often think of David Seabury's likening life to a game of chess, warning that fate sits on the other side of the table watching your moves. Make your moves according to the shifts of fortune, play by play. The principles of this chapter have always worked for me. It's only when I've become careless and failed to follow my own rules that I have found myself once again heading in the wrong direction. End of chapter. Please do hit that like button. I really appreciate that. Thank you for hanging out with me today. And let's move over to the next video where I will continue to the people hurdle So please do, if you like what you hear, please share it with your friends and consider subscribing to the channel.